Hey everybody, it's Scott Shetler here at Extreme Performance Training Systems in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome to this week's episode of Strength and Health TV. In this video, I want to talk about the glute ham raise exercise and go over the technique as well as present some tips on how to perform the exercise correctly. Now, one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make when doing the glute ham raise is they don't set up the bench properly. They get their knees too far behind the rounded pad, and when they raise the body up, the thighs tend to slide down the pad, making the exercise less focused on the hamstrings. So we want to make sure that we're setting up the machine properly or the bench properly to get the most out of the exercise. Generally, you want to set the bench up so that the toe plate is close enough to the pad that the knees are about 1 to 2 inches away from the top of the pad, so that your hips, your thighs are rolling on top of the pad, but your thighs are not sliding down the backside of the pad. The closer you get your knees to the pad, the harder it's going to be on the hamstrings. You're going to feel a lot more, to the point it almost becomes like an inverse curl, which is a really difficult exercise. In fact, the inverse curl machine that was developed by Louis Simmons from Westside Barbell, I had a chance to use it when I was visiting there to do some training and to learn from Louis. Your knees are actually on top of the pad, and they actually had to put a weighted arm on the machine so that it deloads your body and assists you in doing the movement. That's how difficult a true inverse curl is. So the glute ham, you can kind of bridge that gap building up to an inverse curl, but you've got to get that toe plate really close to the pad that your thighs are going to be resting on in order to overload the hamstring properly. So again, you want to start with the knees maybe about 1 to 2 inches behind the pad and make sure that you're driving your toes into the toe plate as you raise your body up. If you don't, your thighs are going to slide down the backside of the pad and you're not going to hit the hamstrings as hard as you can. Now, there's two ways to do the movement. One is to lower the body, flex the hips at the beginning of the movement so that you're doing a hip extension prior to going into the knee flexion phase of the exercise. The other way is just to hold your body out parallel to the ground and just raise it up doing the knee curl or the knee flexion part of the exercise. The biggest problem is when you're doing the variation with the back extension. Sometimes people whip up really hard during the back raise that it creates some momentum going into knee flexion. You maybe take a little bit of stress off the hamstrings. So as long as you do it under control, that's one way to train both functions of the hamstring simultaneously: hip extension and knee flexion. Like I said, the other way to do it, which is very difficult if you're set up properly, is to hold your body parallel to the ground, just do the knee flexion or the leg curl part of the exercise, and then lower yourself back to the start. You can also overload the movement by using a variety of resistance. We can attach bands to the front of the machine so that you can get some elastic resistance. You can hold a plate or a dumbbell or a med ball at your chest to get some free weight resistance as well, or you could use a combination of each. We usually put a band over the neck while holding a plate or other form of weight as we do the exercise. So there's a lot of different ways you can cook it up to get some different types of overload and to add some resistance to the movement. I don't want to get into it, but the bench is also a great way to train your abs. You probably see a lot of people doing sit-ups on this or some different types of abdominal exercises. So the bench is quite versatile, but for the purposes of this video, I just wanted to look at the actual glute ham raise exercise itself. So the keys with this: make sure that the toe plate is close enough to the round pad that your knees are about 1 inch or 2 behind the pad to make sure that you're overloading the hamstrings properly. Drive your toes into the toe plate to initiate the lift. You're going to get some flexion in the calves. You're going to work the hamstrings as well as the glutes in the lower back. If you want to get a little bit more hip extension into the movement, again, you can lower the body down by flexing the hips so that you have to extend the hips prior to the leg curl, or you could just do the variation where you're holding your body parallel to the ground and doing the knee flexion part of it on its own. So I want to demonstrate both of those movements, as well as show how we attach the bands to the machine and do some of the resisted variations of the exercise. So the first variation I'm going to demonstrate is to flex the hips at the beginning of the movement so that we do hip extension prior to the knee flexion part of the exercise. So again, you want to make sure the toe plate is close enough to the pad that your knees are just a couple of inches from the top of the pad and your thighs are on top of the rounded pad. To begin the movement, lower your body down by flexing the hips, then raise the body up, extending the hips, and then going right into the knee flexion part of the exercise. Again, make sure you drive the toes into the toe plate to initiate the movement. And make sure that the toe plate is close enough to the pad that your thighs don't slide down the back side of the pad when you're doing the movement. That'll take some of the stress off the hamstring. Now the second way to do this is to take out the hip flexion at the beginning of the movement so that you're holding your body parallel to the ground at the start of the lift, and that you're returning there after the knee flexion portion of the exercise. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate a couple of reps. So starting out here, drive the toes into the toe plate, and then lower back down, returning to the start position. This places a great deal of stress on the hamstrings and is very close to a true inverse curl exercise. Now, like I said, there's a couple ways we can put some resistance onto the exercise. We usually take a band and attach it to the hooks on our machine. Our bench actually has some hooks welded to it to attach bands to. If you don't have the band hooks or band pegs, you can just pick up the front of the machine and loop a band underneath it. So you can either hold the band at your chest, or you can loop it over your neck. I like to hold it at my chest when I do the banded variation, because generally what I'll do is I'll knock out 10, 12, or 15 reps, whatever I'm shooting for, or whatever I can do with the band, and then I release the band, and then I'll knock out about another 3 to 5 with just body weight to make sure that I'm exhausting my hamstrings fully when I do the exercise. So here's how we do it with the banded variation. I usually just hold the band at my chest, and then it stretches to really overload the top, the peak of the movement. You can also hold a weight plate at the chest or a med ball, any other form of free weight as you're doing the exercise. And you can also use a combination of bands and free weight as well. So those are some of the ways that we can overload the movement to get a little bit more resistance in the exercise. So as I catch my breath here, there's a lot of variety you can do between those two techniques or ways to perform the glute ham raise. And we just try to work it in usually on our lower body workouts. Sometimes we'll do it on off days or on upper body days just to get a little extra hamstring or posterior chain work. Generally what we do is we shoot for about 60 total reps per workout, sometimes up to 100, and we usually do those reps over 4 to 6 sets. So if we're using weight, we're probably going to go a little bit lower reps. Maybe we'll get about 30 to 50 reps per workout. It's going to be a lot harder on the hamstrings. If we're just using body weight, we may push those reps a little bit higher, trying to get 60 to 100 total reps. So it's a great exercise for the hamstrings when done properly, but the big key there is to make sure that the toe plate is close enough to the pad at the beginning of the movement that the knees are only about 1 to 2 inches behind the pad. It's going to overload the hamstrings to a greater degree. If you get that toe plate too far away, you barely get knee flexion, and then the thighs tend to slide down the pad. So setting up properly is critical to performing the exercise properly. So hopefully if you're not doing glute ham raises, hopefully your gym has a bench or you have one at the facility you train at. I definitely recommend incorporating the glute ham raise. However you want to do it, if you want to do it with the back extension plus the knee curl, or if you just want to do the knee curl way, both of them are great. Works the entire lower back, entire posterior chain from the lower back, the glutes, hamstrings, all the way down to the calves when done properly. It's a staple here in our training at EPTS. All my fighters, my athletes, my powerlifters, everybody I train does this, even my general fitness people. Hamstrings are really important for all athletes. Really good for knee strength, knee health, really good for running, jumping, for power movements, and your hamstrings really can't be too strong. So glute ham raise is one of the best ways to strengthen them. Like I said, sets and reps. We usually do 3 to 5, maybe 4 to 6 sets of any, as low as 5 to 7 reps if we're using a lot of weight, as high as 15 to 20 reps if we're just using body weight. So make sure that you're changing up the loading pattern with it quite frequently so that you don't accommodate to the movement, that you're experimenting with different forms of resistance, whether it's bands, whether it's weight, or whether it's a combination of the two, or even just body weight. And plug it into your workout a couple times a week, and you'll see an increase in your deadlift, you'll see an increase in your squat, and you'll see an increase in your running speed and your jumps as well. So like I said, it's a staple here at our training center. Hopefully you're using it. If you're not, hopefully you can get it worked into your program soon. And hopefully you enjoyed this week's video going over the glute ham raise exercise. If you've got any questions or any suggestions for future episode topics, leave those in the comments section below the video. And as always, stay strong and stay healthy.